Section 63 of the Book of Household Management. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of Household Management by Isabella Beeton. Recipes, Chapter 27, Part 5. Pastry Sandwiches. 1318. Ingredients: puff paste, jam of any kind, the white of an egg, sifted sugar. Mode: roll the paste out thin, put half of it on a baking sheet or tin, and spread equally over it apricot, green gage, or any preserve that may be preferred. Lay over this preserve another thin paste. Press the edges together all round, and mark the paste in lines with a knife on the surface, to show where to cut it when baked. Bake from 20 minutes to half an hour, and a short time before being done, take the pastry out of the oven, brush it over with the white of an egg, sift over pounded sugar, and put it back in the oven to colour. When cold, cut it into strips. Pile these on a dish pyramidically, and serve. These strips, cut about 2 inches long, piled in circular rows, and a plateful of flavoured whipped cream poured in the middle, make a very pretty dish. Time: 20 minutes to 1 hour. Average cost, with half a pound of paste, 1s. Sufficient. Half a pound of paste will make 2 dishes of sandwiches. Seasonable at any time. Petit Boucher. 1319. Ingredients: 6 ounces of sweet almonds, 1/4 pound of sifted sugar, the rind of half a lemon, the white of 1 egg, puff paste. Mode: blanch the almonds and chop them fine. Rub the sugar on the lemon rind and pound it in a mortar. Mix this with the almonds and the white of an egg. Roll some puff paste out, cut it in any shape that may be preferred, such as diamonds, rings, ovals, etc., and spread the above mixture over the paste. Bake the bouchées in an oven, not too hot, and serve cold. Time: 1/4 hour, or rather more. Average cost, 1s. Sufficient for half a pound of puff paste. Seasonable at any time. Polish tartlets. 1320. Ingredients: puff paste, the white of an egg, and pounded sugar. Mode: roll some good puff paste out thin, and cut it into 2 1/2-inch squares. Brush each square over with the white of an egg, then fold down the corners, so they all meet together in the middle of each piece of paste. Slightly press the 2 pieces together, brush them over with the egg, sift over sugar, and bake in a nice quick oven for about 1/4 hour. When they are done, make a little hole in the middle of the paste, and fill it up with apricot jam, marmalade, or red currant jelly. Pile them high in the centre of a dish, on a napkin, and garnish with the same preserve the tartlets are filled with. Time: 1/4 hour or 20 minutes. Average cost, with half a pound of puff paste, 1s. Sufficient for 2 dishes of pastry. Seasonable at any time. Note: it should be borne in mind that for all dishes of small pastry, such as the preceding, trimmings of puff pastry, left from larger tarts, answer as well as making the paste expressly. Puit d'amour, or puff paste rings. 1321. Ingredient: puff paste No. 1205, the white of an egg, sifted loaf sugar. Mode: make some good puff paste by recipe No. 1205. Roll it out to the thickness of about 1/4 inch, and with a round fluted paste cutter stamp out as many pieces as may be required. Then work the paste up again and roll it out to the same thickness, and with a smaller cutter stamp out sufficient pieces to correspond with the larger ones. Again stamp out the centre of these smaller rings, brush over the others with the white of an egg, place a small ring on top of every large circular piece of paste, egg over the tops, and bake from 15 to 20 minutes. Sift over sugar, put them back in the oven to colour them, then fill the rings with preserve of any bright colour. Dish them high on a napkin and serve. So many pretty dishes of pastry may be made by stamping puff paste out with fancy cutters, and filling the pieces, when baked, with jelly or preserve, that our space will not allow us to give a separate recipe for each of them; but as they are all made from one paste, and only the shape and garnishing varied, perhaps it is not necessary, and by exercising a little ingenuity, variety may always be obtained. Half moons, leaves, diamonds, stars, shamrock, rings, etc., are the most appropriate shapes for fancy pastry. Time. 15 to 20 minutes. Average cost, with half a pound of paste, 1s. Sufficient for 2 dishes of pastry. Seasonable at any time. Paradise pudding. 1322. Ingredients: 3 eggs, 3 apples, 1/4 lb. of bread crumbs, 3 oz. of sugar, 3 oz. of currants, salt and grated nutmeg to taste, the rind of half a lemon, half a wineglassful of brandy. Mode. Pare, core, and mince the apples into small pieces, and mix them with the other dry ingredients. Beat up the eggs, moisten the mixture with these, and beat it well. Stir in the brandy, and put the pudding into a buttered mould. Tie it down with a cloth, boil for 1 1/2 hour, and serve with sweet sauce. Time. 1 1/2 hour. Average cost, 1s. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Pease pudding. 1323. Ingredients: 1 1/2 pint of split peas, 2 oz. of butter, 2 eggs, pepper and salt to taste. Mode. Put the peas to soak overnight in rain water, and float off any that are worm-eaten or discoloured. Tie them loosely in a clean cloth, leaving a little room for them to swell, and put them on to boil in cold rain water, allowing 2 1/2 hours after the water has simmered up. When the peas are tender, take them up and drain. Rub them through a colander with a wooden spoon. Add the butter, eggs, pepper, and salt. Beat all well together for a few minutes, until the ingredients are well incorporated. Then tie them tightly in a floured cloth. Boil the pudding for another hour. Turn it out on to the dish, and serve very hot. This pudding should always be sent to table with boiled leg of pork, and is an exceedingly nice accompaniment to boiled beef. Time. 2 1/2 hours to boil the peas, tied loosely in the cloth. 1 hour for the pudding. Average cost, 6d. Sufficient for 7 or 8 persons. Seasonable from September to March. Baked plum pudding. 1324. Ingredients: 2 lbs. of flour, 1 lb. of currants, 1 lb. of raisins, 1 lb. of suet, 2 eggs, 1 pint of milk, a few slices of candied peel. Mode. Chop the suet finely, mix with it the flour, currants, stoned raisins, and candied peel. Moisten with the well-beaten eggs, and add sufficient milk to make the pudding of the consistency of a very thick batter. Put it into a buttered dish, and bake in a good oven from 2 1/4 to 2 1/2 hours. Turn it out, strew sifted sugar over, and serve. For a very plain pudding, use only half the quantity of fruit. Omit the eggs, and substitute milk or water for them. The above ingredients make a large family pudding. For a small one, half the quantity would be found ample, but it must be baked quite 1 1/2 hours. Time. Large pudding, 2 1/4 to 2 1/2 hours. Half the size, 1 1/2 hours. Average cost, 2s. 6d. Sufficient for 9 or 10 persons. Seasonable in winter. Raisin grape. All the kinds of raisins have much the same virtues. They are nutritive and balsamic, but they are very subject to fermentation with juices of any kind, and hence, when eaten immoderately, they often bring on colics. There are many varieties of grape used for raisins. The fruit of Valencia is that mostly dried for culinary purposes, while most of the table kinds are grown in Malaga and called muscatels. The finest of all table raisins comes from Provence or Italy. The most esteemed of all are those of Roquevert. They are very large and very sweet. This sort is rarely eaten by any but the most wealthy. The dried Malaga or Muscatel raisins, which come to this country packed in small boxes, and nicely preserved in bunches, are variable in their quality, but mostly of a rich flavour when new, juicy, and of a deep purple hue. An excellent plum pudding made without eggs. 1325. INGREDIENTS. 1/2 lb. of flour, 6 oz. of raisins, 6 oz. of currants, 1/4 lb. of chopped suet, 1/4 lb. of brown sugar, 1/4 lb. of mashed carrot, 1/4 lb. of mashed potatoes, 1 tablespoonful of treacle, 1 oz. of candied lemon peel, 1 oz. of candied citron. Mode. Mix the flour, currants, suet, and sugar well together. Have ready the above proportions of mashed carrot and potato, which stir into the other ingredients. Add the treacle and lemon peel, but put no liquid in the mixture, or it will be quite spoiled. Tie it loosely in a cloth, or if put into a basin, do not quite fill it, as the pudding should have room to swell, and boil it for about 4 hours. Serve with brandy sauce. This pudding is better for being mixed overnight. Time. 4 hours. Average cost, 1s. 6d. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable in winter. An unrivalled plum pudding. 1326. INGREDIENTS. 1 1/2 lb. of muscatel raisins, 1 3/4 lb. of currants, 1 lb. of sultana raisins, 2 lbs. of the finest moist sugar, 2 lbs. of bread crumbs, 16 eggs, 2 lbs. of finely chopped suet, 6 oz. of mixed candy peel, the rind of 2 lemons, 1 oz. of ground nutmeg, 1 oz. of ground cinnamon, 1/2 oz. of pounded bitter almonds, 1/4 pint of brandy. Mode. Stone and cut up the raisins, but do not chop them. Wash and dry the currants, and cut the candied peel into thin slices. Mix all the dry ingredients well together, and moisten with the eggs, which should be well beaten and strained to the pudding. Stir in the brandy, and when all is thoroughly mixed, well butter and flour a stout new pudding cloth. Put in the pudding, tie down very tightly and closely, boil from 6 to 8 hours, and serve with brandy sauce. A few sweet almonds, blanched and cut into slips, and stuck on the pudding, ornament it prettily. This quantity may be divided and boiled in buttered moulds. For small families it is the most desirable way, as the above will be found to make a pudding of rather large dimensions. Time. 6 to 8 hours. Average cost, 7s. 6d. Seasonable in winter. Sufficient for 12 or 14 persons. Note. The muscatel raisins can be purchased at a cheap rate loose, not in bunches. They are then scarcely higher in price than the ordinary raisin, and impart a much richer flavour to the pudding. Sultana grape. We have elsewhere stated that the small black grape grown in Corinth and the Ionian Isles is, when dried, the common currant of the grocer's shop. The white or yellow grape, grown in the same places, is somewhat larger than the black variety, and it is that which produces the sultana raisin. It has been called sultana from its delicate qualities and unique growth. The finest are those of Smyrna. They have not sufficient flavour and sugary properties to serve alone for puddings and cakes, but they are peculiarly valuable for mixing, that is to say, for introducing in company with the richer sorts of Valencia or Muscatel. In white puddings or cakes, too, where the whiteness must be preserved, the sultana raisin should be used. But the greatest value of this fruit in the cuisine is that of its saving labour, for it has no stones. Half muscatels and half sultanas are an admirable mixture for general purpose. A plain Christmas pudding for children. 1327. INGREDIENTS. 1 lb. of flour, 1 lb. of bread crumbs, 3/4 lb. of stoned raisins, 3/4 lb. of currants, 3/4 lb. of suet, 3 or 4 eggs, milk, 2 oz. of candied peel, 1 teaspoonful of powdered allspice, half a saltspoonful of salt. Mode. Let the suet be finely chopped, the raisins stoned, and the currants well washed, picked, and dried. Mix these with the other dry ingredients, and stir all well together. Beat and strain the eggs to the pudding; stir these in, and add just sufficient milk to make it mix properly. Tie it up in a well floured cloth, put it into boiling water, and boil for at least 5 hours. Serve with a sprig of holly placed in the middle of the pudding, and a little pounded sugar sprinkled over it. Time. 5 hours. Average cost, 1s. 9d. Sufficient for 9 or 10 children. Seasonable at Christmas. Raisins. Raisins are grapes, prepared by suffering them to remain on the vine until they are perfectly ripe, and then drying them in the sun or by the heat of an oven. The sun-dried grapes are sweet, the oven-dried grapes of an acid flavour. The common ways of drying grapes for raisins is to tie 2 or 3 bunches of them together, whilst yet on the vine, and dip them into a hot lixivium of wood ashes mixed with a little of the oil of olive. This disposes them to shrink and wrinkle, after which they are left on the vine 3 or 4 days, separated on sticks in a horizontal situation, and then dried in the sun at leisure, after being cut from the tree. Christmas plum pudding, very good. 1328. Ingredients: 1 1/2 lb. of raisins, 1/2 lb. of currants, 1/2 lb. of mixed peel, 3/4 lb. of bread crumbs, 3/4 lb. of suet, 8 eggs, 1 wineglassful of brandy. Mode. Stone and cut the raisins in halves, but do not chop them. Wash, pick, and dry the currants, and mince the suet finely. Cut the candied peel into thin slices, and grate down the bread into fine crumbs. When all these dry ingredients are prepared, mix them well together; then moisten the mixture with eggs, which should be well beaten, and the brandy. Stir well, that everything may be very thoroughly blended, and press the pudding into a buttered mould. Tie it down tightly with a floured cloth, and boil for 5 or 6 hours. It may be boiled in a cloth without a mould, and will require the same time allowed for cooking. As Christmas puddings are usually made a few days before they are required for table, when the pudding is taken out of the pot, hang it immediately, and put a plate or saucer underneath to catch the water that may drain from it. The day it is to be eaten, plunge it into boiling water, and keep it boiling for at least 2 hours, then turn it out of the mould, and serve with brandy sauce. On Christmas Day, a sprig of holly is usually placed in the middle of the pudding, and about a wineglassful of brandy poured around it, which at the moment of serving is lighted, and the pudding thus brought to the table encircled in flame. Time. 5 or 6 hours the first time of boiling, 2 hours the day it is to be served. Average cost, 4s. Sufficient for a quart mould for 7 or 8 persons. Seasonable on the 25th of December, and on various festive occasions till March. Note. 5 or 6 of these puddings should be made at one time, as they will keep good for many weeks, and in cases where unexpected guests arrive, will be found an acceptable, and as it only requires warming through, a quickly prepared dish. Moulds of every shape and size are manufactured for these puddings, and may be purchased of Messrs. R. and J. Slack, 336 Strand. Brandy is the alcoholic or spirituous portion of wine, separated from the aqueous part, the colouring matter, etc., by distillation. The word is of German origin, and in its German form, Brandewine signifies burnt wine, or wine that has undergone the action of fire. Brandies so called, however, have been made from potatoes, carrots, beetroot, pears, and other vegetable substances, but they are all inferior to true brandy. Brandy is prepared in most wine countries, but that of France is the most esteemed. It is procured not only by distilling the wine itself, but also by fermenting and distilling the marc, or residue of the pressing of the grape. It is procured indifferently from red or white wine, and different wines yield very different proportions of it, the strongest, of course, giving the largest quantity. Brandy obtained from marc has a more acrid taste than that from wine. The celebrated brandy of Cognac, a town in the department of Charente, and that brought from Andrea, seem to owe their excellence from being made from white wine. Like other spirit, brandy is colourless when recently distilled. By mere keeping, however, owing probably to some change in the soluble matter contained in it, it acquires a slight colour, which is much increased by keeping in casks, and is made of the required intensity by the addition of burnt sugar or other colouring matter. What is called British brandy is not in fact brandy, which is the name, as we have said, of a spirit distilled from wine, but is a spirit made chiefly from malt spirit, with the addition of mineral acids and various flavouring ingredients, the exact composition being kept secret. It is distilled somewhat extensively in this country, real brandy scarcely at all. The brandies imported into England are chiefly from Bordeaux, Rochelle, and Cognac. A pound plum pudding, 1329. Ingredients: 1 pound of suet, 1 pound of currants, 1 pound of stoned raisins, 8 eggs, half a grated nutmeg, 2 ounces of sliced candy peel, 1 teaspoonful of ground ginger, half a pound of bread crumbs, half a pound of flour, half a pint of milk. Mode. Chop the suet finely, mix with it the dry ingredients, stir these well together, and add the well-beaten eggs and milk to moisten with. Beat up the mixture well, and should the above proportion of milk not be found sufficient to make it of the proper consistency, a little more should be added. Press the pudding into a mould, tie it with a floured cloth, and boil for 5 hours, or rather longer, and serve with brandy sauce. Time. 5 hours or longer. Average cost, 3s. Sufficient for 7 or 8 persons. Seasonable in winter. Note. The above pudding may be baked instead of boiled. It should be put into a buttered mould or tin, and baked for about 2 hours. A smaller one would take about 1 1/4 hours. Citron. The fruit of the citron tree, Citrus medica, is acidulous, antiseptic, and antiscorbutic. It excites the appetite and stops vomiting, and, like lemon juice, has been greatly extolled in chronic rheumatism, gout, and scurvy. Mixed with cordials, it is used as an antidote to the machineel poison. The candied peel is prepared in the same way as orange or lemon peel. That is to say, the peel is boiled in water until quite soft, and then suspended in concentrated syrup in the cold, after which it is either dried in a current of warm air or in a stove, at a heat not exceeding 120° Fahrenheit. The syrup must be kept fully saturated with sugar by reboiling it once or twice during the process. It may be dusted with powdered lump sugar if necessary. The citron is supposed to be the Median, Assyrian, or Persian apple of the Greeks. It is described by Risso as having a majestic appearance, its shining leaves and rosy flowers being succeeded by fruit whose beauty and size astonish the observer, whilst their odour gratifies his senses. In China there is an enormous variety, but the citron is cultivated in all orange-growing countries. Plum pudding of fresh fruit. 1330. Ingredients: 3/4 lb. of suet crust No. 1215, 1 1/2 pint of Orleans or any other kind of plum, 1/4 lb. of moist sugar. Mode. Line a pudding basin with suet crust rolled out to the thickness of about 1/2 inch. Fill the basin with the fruit, put in the sugar, and cover with crust. Fold the edges over and pinch them together to prevent the juice escaping. Tie over a floured cloth, put the pudding into boiling water, and boil from 2 to 2 1/2 hours. Turn it out of the basin and serve quickly. Time. 2 to 2 1/2 hours. Average cost, 10d. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable, with various kinds of plums, from the beginning of August to the beginning of October. Plums. Almost all the varieties of the cultivated plum are agreeable and refreshing. It is not a nourishing fruit, and if indulged in to excess when unripe, is almost certain to cause diarrhoea and cholera. Weak and delicate persons had better abstain from plums altogether. The modes of preparing plums are as numerous as the varieties of the fruit. The objections raised against raw plums do not apply to the cooked fruit, which even the invalid may eat in moderation. Plum tart. 1331. Ingredients: 1/2 lb. of good short crust No. 1211, 1 1/2 pints of plums, 1/4 lb. of moist sugar. Mode. Line the edges of a deep tart dish with a crust made by recipe No. 1211. Fill the dish with plums, and place a small cup or jar upside down in the midst of them. Put in the sugar, cover the pie with crust, ornament the edges, and bake in a good oven from 1/2 to 3/4 hour. When puff crust is preferred to short crust, use that made by recipe No. 1206, and glaze the top by brushing it over with the white of an egg beaten to a stiff froth with a knife. Sprinkle over a little sifted sugar, and put the pie in the oven to set the glaze. Time. 1/2 to 3/4 hour. Average cost, 1s. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable, with various kinds of plums, from the beginning of August to the beginning of October. Potato pasty. 1332. Ingredients: 1 1/2 lb. of rump steak or mutton cutlets, pepper and salt to taste, 1/3 pint of weak broth or gravy, 1 oz. of butter, mashed potatoes. Mode. Place the meat, cut in small pieces, at the bottom of the pan, season it with pepper and salt, and add the gravy and butter broken into small pieces. Put on the perforated plate with its valve pipe screwed on, and fill up the whole space to the top of the tube with nicely mashed potatoes mixed with a little milk, and finish the surface of them in any ornamental manner. If carefully baked, the potatoes will be covered with a delicate brown crust, retaining all the savoury steam rising from the meat. Send it to the table as it comes from the oven, with a napkin folded around it. Time. 40 to 60 minutes. Average cost, 2s. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable at any time. Potato pudding. 1333. Ingredients: 1/2 lb. of mashed potatoes, 2 oz. of butter, 2 eggs, 1/4 pint of milk, 3 tablespoonfuls of sherry, 1/4 saltspoonful of salt, the juice and rind of 1 small lemon, 2 oz. of sugar. Mode. Boil sufficient potatoes to make 1/2 lb. when mashed. Add to these the butter, eggs, milk, sherry, lemon juice, and sugar. Mince the lemon peel very finely, and beat all the ingredients well together. Put the pudding into a buttered pie dish, and bake for rather more than 1/2 hour. To enrich it, add a few pounded almonds, and increase the quantity of eggs and butter. Time. 1/2 hour, or rather longer. Average cost, 8d. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable at any time. To ice or glaze pastry. 1334. To glaze pastry, which is the usual method adopted for meat or raised pies, break an egg, separate the yolk from the white, and beat the former for a short time. Then, when the pastry is nearly baked, take it out of the oven, brush it over with this beaten yolk of egg, and put it back in the oven to set the glaze. 1335. To ice pastry, which is the usual method adopted for fruit tarts and sweet dishes of pastry, put the white of an egg on a plate, and with the blade of a knife beat it to a stiff froth. When the pastry is nearly baked, brush it over with this, and sift over some pounded sugar. Put it back into the oven to set the glaze, and in a few minutes it will be done. Great care should be taken that the paste does not catch or burn in the oven, which it is very liable to do after the icing is laid on. Sufficient. Allow 1 egg and 1 1/8 oz. of sugar to glaze 3 tarts. Sugar. Sugar has been happily called the honey of reeds. The sugar cane appears to be originally a native of the East Indies. The Chinese have cultivated it for 2000 years. The Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Jews knew nothing about it. The Greek physicians are the first who speak of it. It was not till the year 1471 that a Venetian discovered the method of purifying brown sugar and making loaf sugar. He gained an immense fortune by this discovery. Our supplies are now obtained from Barbados, Jamaica, Mauritius, Ceylon, the East and West Indies generally, and the United States, but the largest supplies come from Cuba. Sugar is divided into the following classes: refined sugar, white clayed, brown raw, and molasses. The sugar cane grows to the height of 6, 12, or even sometimes 20 feet. It is propagated from cuttings, requires much hoeing and weeding, giving employment to thousands upon thousands of slaves in the slave countries, and attains maturity in 12 or 13 months. When ripe, it is cut down close to the stole. The stems are divided into lengths of about 3 feet, which are made up into bundles and carried to the mill, to be crushed between rollers. In the process of crushing, the juice runs down into a reservoir, from which, after a while, it is drawn through a siphon. That is to say, the clear fluid is taken from the scum. This fluid undergoes several processes of drying and refining, the methods varying in different manufactories. There are some large establishments engaged in sugar refining in the neighbourhoods of Blackwall and Bethnal Green, London. The process is mostly in the hands of German workmen. Sugar is adulterated with fine sand and sawdust. Pure sugar is highly nutritious, adding to the fatty tissue of the body, but it is not easy of digestion. Baked raisin pudding, plain and economical. 1336. Ingredients: 1 lb. of flour, 3/4 lb. of stoned raisins, half a pound of suet, a pinch of salt, 1 oz. of sugar, a little grated nutmeg, and milk. Mode. Chop the suet finely, stone the raisins and cut them in halves, mix these with the suet, add the salt, sugar, and grated nutmeg, and moisten the whole with sufficient milk to make it of the consistency of thick batter. Put the pudding into a buttered pie dish, and bake for 1 1/2 hour, or rather longer. Turn it out of the dish, strew sifted sugar over, and serve. This is a very plain recipe, and suitable where there is a family of children. It, of course, can be much improved by the addition of candied peel, currants, and rather a larger proportion of suet. A few eggs would also make the pudding richer. Time. 1 1/2 hours. Average cost 9d. Sufficient for 7 or 8 persons. Seasonable in winter. Introduction of sugar. Sugar was first known as a drug, and used by the apothecaries, and with them was a most important article. At its first appearance, some said it was heating, others that it injured the chest, others that it disposed persons to apoplexy. The truth, however, soon conquered these fancies, and the use of sugar has increased every day, and there is no household in the civilized world which can do without it. Boiled raisin pudding, plain and economical. 1337. Ingredients: 1 lb. of flour, half a pound of stoned raisins, half a pound of chopped suet, half a saltspoonful of salt, and milk. Mode. After having stoned the raisins and chopped the suet finely, mix them with the flour, add the salt, and when these dry ingredients are thoroughly mixed, moisten the pudding with sufficient milk to make it into rather a stiff paste. Tie it up in a floured cloth, put it into boiling water, and boil for 4 hours. Serve with sifted sugar. This pudding may also be made in a long shape, the same as a rolled jam pudding, and will then not require so long boiling. 2 1/2 hours would then be quite sufficient. Time. Made round, 4 hours; in a long shape, 2 1/2 hours. Average cost, 9d. Sufficient for 8 or 9 persons. Seasonable in winter. Boiled rhubarb pudding. 1338. INGREDIENTS. 4 or 5 sticks of fine rhubarb, 1/2 lb. of moist sugar, 3/4 lb. of suet crust No. 1215. Mode. Make a suet crust with 3/4 lb. of flour by recipe No. 1215, and line a buttered basin with it. Wash and wipe the rhubarb, and if old, string it; that is to say, pare off the outside skin, cut it into inch lengths, fill the basin with it, put in the sugar, and cover with crust. Pinch the edges of the pudding together, tie over it a floured cloth, put it into boiling water, and boil from 2 to 2 1/2 hours. Turn it out of the basin, and serve with a jug of cream and sifted sugar. Time. 2 to 2 1/2 hours. Average cost, 7d. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable in spring. Rhubarb tart. 1339. INGREDIENTS. 1/2 lb. of puff paste No. 1206, about 5 sticks of large rhubarb, 1/4 lb. of moist sugar. Mode. Make a puff crust by recipe No. 1206. Line the edges of a deep pie dish with it, and wash, wipe, and cut the rhubarb into pieces about 1 inch long. Should it be old and tough, string it; that is to say, pare off the outside skin. Pile the fruit high in the dish, as it shrinks very much in the cooking. Put in the sugar, cover with crust, ornament the edges, and bake the tart in a well-heated oven from 1/2 to 3/4 hour. If wanted very nice, brush it over with the white of an egg beaten to a stiff froth, then sprinkle on it some sifted sugar, and put it in the oven just to set the glaze. This should be done when the tart is nearly baked. A small quantity of lemon juice and a little of the peel minced are by many persons considered an improvement to the flavour of rhubarb tart. Time. 1/2 to 3/4 hour. Average cost, 9d. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable in spring. Rhubarb. This is one of the most useful of all garden productions that are put into pies and puddings. It was comparatively little known till within the last 20 or 30 years, but is now cultivated in almost every British garden. The part used is the footstalks of the leaves, which, peeled and cut into small pieces, are put into tarts, either mixed with apples or alone. When quite young, they are much better not peeled. Rhubarb comes in season when the apples are going out. The common rhubarb is a native of Asia. The scarlet variety has the finest flavour. Turkey rhubarb, the well-known medicinal drug, is the root of a very elegant plant, Rheum palmatum, coming to the greatest perfection in Tartary. For culinary purposes, all kinds of rhubarb are the better for being blanched. Raised pie of poultry or game. 1340. INGREDIENTS. To every pound of flour allow 1/2 lb. of butter, 1/2 pint of water, the yolks of 2 eggs, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. These are for the crust. 1 large fowl or pheasant, a few slices of veal cutlet, a few slices of dressed ham, forcemeat, seasoning of nutmeg, allspice, pepper, and salt, gravy. Mode. Make a stiff short crust with the above proportion of butter, flour, water, and egg, and work it up very smoothly. Butter a raised pie mould, as shown in No. 1190, and line it with the paste. Previously to making the crust, bone the fowl, or whatever bird is intended to be used, lay it, breast downwards, upon a cloth, and season the inside well with pounded mace, allspice, pepper, and salt. Then spread over it a layer of forcemeat, then a layer of seasoned veal, and then one of ham, and then another layer of forcemeat, and roll the fowl over, making the skin meet at the back. Line the pie with forcemeat, put in the fowl, and fill up the cavities with slices of seasoned veal and ham and forcemeat. Wet the edges of the pie, put on the cover, pinch the edges together with the paste pincers, and decorate it with leaves. Brush it over with beaten yolk of egg, and bake in a moderate oven for 4 hours. In the meantime, make a good strong gravy from the bones. Pour it through a funnel into the hole at the top, cover this hole with a small leaf, and the pie, when cold, will be ready for use. Let it be remembered that the gravy must be considerably reduced before it is poured into the pie, as, when cold, it should form a firm jelly, and not be the least degree in a liquid state. This recipe is suitable for all kinds of poultry or game, using one or more birds, according to the size of the pie intended to be made. But the birds must always be boned. Truffles, mushrooms, etc., added to this pie make it much nicer, and to enrich it, lard the fleshy parts of the poultry or game with thin strips of bacon. This method of forming raised pies in a mould is generally called a timbale, and has the advantage of being more easily made than one when the paste is raised by the hands, the crusts beside being eatable. Time. Large pie, 4 hours. Average cost, 6s. 6d. Seasonable, with poultry, all the year, with game from September to March. Raised pie of veal and ham. 1341. Ingredients: 3 or 4 lbs of veal cutlets, a few slices of bacon or ham, seasoning of pepper, salt, nutmeg, and allspice, forcemeat No. 415, 2 lbs of hot water paste No. 1217, half a pint of good strong gravy. Mode. To raise the crust for a pie with the hands is a very difficult task, and can only be accomplished by skilled and experienced cooks. The process should be seen to be satisfactorily learnt, and plenty of practice given to the making of raised pies, as by that means only will success be ensured. Make a hot water paste by recipe No. 1217, and from the mass raise the pie with the hands. If this cannot be accomplished, cut out pieces for the top and bottom, and a long piece for the sides. Fasten the bottom and side piece together by means of egg, and pinch the edges well together. Then line the pie with forcemeat made by recipe No. 415. Put in a layer of veal and a plentiful seasoning of salt, pepper, nutmeg, and allspice, as, let it be remembered, these pies taste very insipid unless highly seasoned. Over the seasoning place a layer of sliced bacon or cooked ham, and then a layer of forcemeat, veal seasoning, and bacon, and so on, until the meat rises to about 1 inch above the paste, taking care to finish with a layer of forcemeat, to fill all cavities of the pie, and to lay in the meat firmly and compactly. Brush the top edge of the pie with beaten egg, put on the cover, press the edges, and pinch them round with paste pincers. Make a hole in the middle of the lid, and ornament the pie with leaves, which should be stuck on with the white of an egg, then brush it all over with the beaten yolk of an egg, and bake the pie in an oven with a soaking heat from 3 to 4 hours. To ascertain when it is done, run a sharp-pointed knife or skewer through the hole at the top into the middle of the pie, and if the meat feels tender, it is sufficiently baked. Have ready about half a pint of very strong gravy, pour it through a funnel into the hole at the top, stop up the hole with a small leaf of baked paste, and put the pie away until wanted for use. Should it acquire too much colour in the baking, cover it with white paper, as the crust should not in the least degree be burnt. Mushrooms, truffles, and many other ingredients may be added to enrich the flavour of these pies, and the very fleshy parts of the meat may be larded. These pies are more frequently served cold than hot, and form excellent dishes for cold suppers or breakfasts. The cover of the pie is sometimes carefully removed, leaving the perfect edges and the top decorated with square pieces of very bright aspic jelly. This has an exceedingly pretty effect. Time. About 4 hours. Average cost, 6s. 6d. Sufficient for a very large pie. Seasonable from March to October. Section 63.